So if you've been playing Team Fortress 2 for any modicum of time whatsoever, this should be a pretty familiar sight to you. And this one too, and this one right here. For some reason, these three classes are some of the most popular choices amongst newer players. It's very interesting to study what kind of classes newer players go for, as very few of them ever go for, say, Demo or Medic, yet there are hundreds of thousands of newer snipers, spies and pyros who can often be distinguished by their quite limited range and headwear. So over the past week, I've spent hours studying these kind of players in their natural habitats, being anything from 2-Fort servers to 24/7 Dust Bowl servers to even idle servers, as I've really tried to find out as to why they choose these three classes in particular more than others. And I've honestly found some pretty interesting finds, and I'm going to present them to you in this video today. How this works is that I'll be starting with Pyro and ending in Spy, and I'm going to be talking about where these players can be found, the kind of playstyles they use, and as to why it is so. I had a lot of fun making this video and observing these kinds of players, so if you're interested to see more content like this, please subscribe, as it would actively help me out quite a lot. But without further ado, let's start with Pyro. So newer Pyro players are generally my favourites among the three, as there's a certain level of innocence to them. They're not trying to overestimate their skill by hitting insanely quick headshots, or they're not trying to manipulate the team into thinking they're one of them. They just kind of have this generally friendly vibe about them, and I think they're a blast to be around. When it comes to the kind of weapons these players gravitate towards, I've found the most common denominators include the stock flamethrower, the backburner, the rainblower, the man melter, the flare gun, the home wrecker, the stock fire axe, and of course the lollychop. I believe the reason these weapons are popular amongst newer Pyro players is because they're quite similar to stock. They're not trying to do something confusing with their stats, a bit like how the degreaser does. They're just basically stock variations with just minor changes in damage or playstyle here and there. Typically, the kind of game modes these pyros would be playing would be Attack Defense, Capture the Flag, or King of the Hill. Maps like Harvest, for example, are very popular amongst newer pyros, and so are maps like 2-Fort and Dust Bowl. When it comes to their playstyles, there should only be one thing that comes to mind: WM1. The way Valve has designed Pyro over the years is that Air Blast has constantly been nerfed and nerfed to the point where WM1 is actually just the strongest way to play Pyro. Puff and Sting is completely and utterly dead, and the Air Blast changes in Jungle Inferno were quite strong at first, until we realised it didn't work with the reserve shooter. So WM1 is generally the most encouraged way Valve thinks these players should play the game, and therefore that's exactly what they do. As to why they pick Pyro, I think it has something to do with the uniqueness of the class. You see, there's no real typical gunning class in TF2, like for example Soldier 76 or so many other variations throughout gaming history. Each TF2 class is unique as they have their own weapons and skill sets, and because Pyro, a flamethrowing maniac, is very unique amongst shooters, I feel that's probably why they gravitate towards him. His kit is also very simple, much more simple than something like the Medic or the Engineer, and even though he has a pretty high skill ceiling in of himself, he's generally much easier to pick up and play than something like the Scout or Sniper. So I honestly do recommend newer players pick up Pyro as their first class, as I really do think that Pyro teaches you pretty fast what classes do and don't counter each other in this game. Pyro of course has a built-in hard counter to one of the most difficult classes for newer players to fight, the Spy, and even though it's a much shorter range class than some of the other mercs, he can hold his own against projectile based characters with his Air Blast, yet at the same time he also gets completely and utterly destroyed by Sniper. Learning these kind of matchups is an invaluable thing for newer players to pick up really early, and therefore that's why I think Pyro actually teaches you these better than most other classes possibly could. So yeah, if you're a new player, I actively recommend you pick up Pyro. I know people are going to flame me in the comments for saying that, but then again, we all had to start learning somewhere, and I generally think Pyro is the best step in the door for doing so. Next on our list of popular characters amongst newer players is Sniper. Now, we've all seen the teams before that have 4 gibbous snipers all staring at some wall in some random part of the map. Sniper is a very, very popular pick amongst newer players. The new to play Sniper loadout set is going to include, but is not limited to, the Markener, the Classic, the Darwin Stager Shield, the SMG, the Jurati Bushwhacker combo, and the Necro Smasher for some reason. Yeah, it's quite an odd ensemble of weapons with no real symmetry between their kits or uses. However, I actually think this is why they're most used amongst snipers. They don't really understand how these weapons work. Weapons like the Classic can be quite difficult to use and understand, and that's probably where the interest for that comes from. And other examples such as the SMG you wouldn't use if you knew just truly how bad it was, and generally that's where I think the synergy comes between these kits. These sniper mains use these weapons because they don't really know how bad they work, or they don't really know how bad they work with each other. In terms of modes where you can find these kind of players, Capture the Flag is always a pretty obvious one, yet I've also found they're often quite common on payload, specifically on blue team, and I really don't know why that is. When it comes to maps, however, there is one king amongst kings of all the stomping grounds, 2-Fort. 2-Fort snipers are a notorious meme within this community. They have been there since day one, and they have been there for 17 years. And generally the running theme with these kind of sniper mains is that they tend to play on very old maps, like for example Upward, Dust Bowl, Well, all these kind of things. And I think there's a very good reason for that, but it's also quite a complex one. The reason in question is that when we were all new players, we were all playing Sniper with this exact kind of loadout, this exact kind of playstyle on these exact kind of maps. And newer players have seen this, and I assume they just think that's how Sniper is meant to be played. So they start doing this, and when they realise it's not, they move on to other maps, they move on to other weapons and other playstyles. But in the time, even newer players have seen them doing this, and are copying them, and the cycle of life never ends. When it comes to their playstyles, however, you can expect a forecast of 100% tunnel vision 7 days a week, every week. While it might be easy to think that these players have some very loud music playing or their sound turned down or something, I think the real answer is they're not really trained to know which sounds in TF2 are dangerous or whatnot. This is a dangerous sound, yet how are you supposed to know that if you're just a new player? Now, why do all these players pick Sniper? Well, it's kind of the opposite reason as to why people pick Pyro actually. Familiarity. Back in my day, most of these players would have been coming from Call of Duty games or anything like that, and they would have seen snipers, they would have seen SMGs and thought, wow, and therefore that's why they started to play them. Nowadays though, I'm not really too sure, as there hasn't been a good COD game for a very long amount of time, so maybe it's got something to do with how skill dependent classes have gotten much more popular over the years. As for example, there's a lot more ways to get sniper clips than there are heavy clips, maybe that has something to do with it, I'm not too sure. Or maybe it's just a good sign of familiarity and comfort, as most snipers within games are generally pretty consistent. Do I recommend you, a fictionally new sniper, to go out and pick up as your first class? No, I do not. As to play Sniper, you not only need to be aware of everything in front of you, but most certainly everything behind you as well. And standing still in one corner of a map for several minutes of the match isn't going to teach you that. You need to be on the payload, you need to be checking the flanks and all sorts of things like that. Classes like Soldiers, Pyros and Heavies are going to teach you much more spatial awareness than just playing Sniper would. So no, I don't recommend you play Sniper as your first class, but maybe as your fourth or fifth. And finally, the last class on our list today is of course Spy. Now, newer Spies and newer Snipers are the exact same people. They transfer the exact same skills from one class to another and literally don't change anything about how they play. So if you're wondering as to why the video is still as long as it is, well, I might as well talk about a few small differences. So newer Spies are a lot like newer Snipers, in which they try to replicate the skill sets of other players purely by using their weapons alone and not the spatial awareness. But the interesting thing about newer Spies is that they seem to be a little bit out of date as to what good players consider to be good weapons, as they'll often be found rocking things like the Ambassador, to the Eurotunnel Award, to Bot Killers, to the Cloak and Dagger. Newer Spies are the most spread out of the three classes we've covered today, as they're not really tied down by certain game modes or playstyles. Once again, they're popular amongst attack and defend maps, as well that's just generally where you find a lot of new players to begin with, as this is quite an easy concept to grasp, but I often find a lot of them on payload as well. But another interesting thing about newer Spies is that I generally consider these guys out of all the three classes we covered today to be the most likely to play on alternate game mode maps. So think things like Payload Race or Saxton Hale, because they've seen the YouTube shorts of people absolutely destroying him on there. Game modes aside, popular maps include Two Fort, a lot of new players play on Two Fort, but also others like Harvest and Hightower, as I generally find they're quite common on there as well. In terms of playstyles, if Oblivious Face Stab to Death combo doesn't ring true to you, then you're thinking of the wrong class. Your average new Spy will also equip the Cloak and Dagger, as previously mentioned, because they understand it gives them infinite cloak, and therefore they'll maybe try to go for one stab, miss, and spend the rest of the match hiding somewhere in the corner waiting for it to recharge. When it comes to reasoning of choice, however, it's the exact same as Pyro and the opposite of Sniper, uniqueness. Spy is a fantastically unique class amongst first-person shooters. Me personally, I've known many Spy mains who only originally downloaded TF2 because of Spy's uniqueness, and I'm pretty sure if you have a think you'd know some as well. But I honestly think Spy's design leads into a much larger problem as a whole. He's just too cool, and new players can't resist trying him out. But maybe we should take that as an omen as to how fantastically designed this game was in the first place. Now, in terms of as to whether I recommend newer players pick up Spy off the bat, no I do not. I think Spy takes a lot of awareness of the game and a lot of knowledge of the class's strengths and weaknesses, and I don't think you can necessarily learn that just by playing Spy alone. I personally recommend once you have a good understanding of how strong some classes are against others, then you play Spy. So, for example, I recommend picking up Heavy first, as, well, Heavy will teach you just how to counter Spies perfectly fine, and once you know how to counter them, you know how to play them. And I think that just about wraps up my week's worth of studies into the newer players of this game. I avoided using the term free-to-play, as many of these players, for example, do have, say, Manco store hats, as they've often gone to buy, for example, the Rainblower from the store, yet that hat doesn't really equivalent to any level of skill, they're still the exact same player. I feel like I should also say that I'm not intentionally talking down or booing upon these players, it's just my monotone British voice that makes me sound like that, because I really like these players in reality. I think they're so fun to watch. And I find it hilarious that when we started out TF2, were doing the exact same things that they're still doing today. This was honestly one of my most fun videos to make. I had an absolute joy making this, and if you'd like to see more content like this, please stick around as I've got lots more coming up in the future. But with that being said, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you later down the sunny road.